The man who murdered 3 people from Wilshire, Ohio, has his execution date now set.
June 4, 1989, 7 a.m., Tampa Bay, Florida. A group of sailors crosses beneath the Sunshine Skyway Bridge when one of them spots something in the water. At first, they think it's a log, driftwood, maybe, but as they get closer, they realize it's not a log. We have a body, female, face down in the water. Minutes later, another call comes in. Another body, 2 miles north, then a third, 3 women, all floating face down, hands bound, feet tied, thick ropes wrapped around their necks, connected to concrete blocks. But here's what made seasoned investigators physically sick. The medical examiner found water in their lungs. They were alive when they hit the water. Michelle, the oldest daughter, had managed to free one hand before she drowned. A sign she fought until her very last breath. The Florida sun blazed that morning as officers worked to recover the bodies. News helicopters circled overhead, yellow tape stretched across the shoreline, and every detective there knew they were looking at something evil. 3 victims, mother and 2 teenage daughters, tourists from Ohio, who came to Florida for sunshine and theme parks. But what they found was a monster, a man who smiled kindly, offered help, and then took them on a boat ride they'd never return from. This is the story of the handwritten map that caught a killer, and the 3-year hunt for the man who threw a family into Tampa Bay while they were still breathing. May 26, 1989. Wilshire, Ohio. Joan Rogers, 36 years old, hacks up her car. She's a farmer's wife, hard-working, rarely takes a break, but this trip is special. She's taking her 2 daughters, 17-year-old Michelle and 14-year-old Christy, on their first real vacation outside Ohio. Destination: Florida. They leave early that morning. The girls are excited, smiling, taking pictures with their small Kodak camera. For days, they visit Orlando's theme parks, see the attractions, eat ice cream, laugh. It's supposed to be a memory they'd cherish forever. But by June 1, 1989, their vacation is over. Time to head home. They leave Orlando around 9 a.m. The plan is simple: stop for the night, rest, and continue driving back to Ohio the next morning. But somewhere along Route 60, Joan gets lost. She's not used to city roads. Tampa Bay's winding bridges and causeways are confusing. And that's when they meet him. Tall, middle-aged, confident. His name, Chandler. He tells them he can help. He's friendly, polite, and he mentions something that makes Joan relax. He's originally from Ohio, too. Chandler gives them directions to a day's inn along Route 60, near the Courtney Campbell Causeway, a long bridge stretching across Tampa Bay's calm blue waters. He even writes down the directions. Neat handwriting, looping smoothly, and then he makes an offer. I could take you on a sunset boat ride later, if you'd like. Joan smiles. She thinks, what a nice man. She has no idea. She just met a predator. 12:30 p.m. Joan and her daughters check into the day's inn. The room is simple. 2 beds, a small balcony, a view of the bay. Photos found later from their camera show Michelle sitting on the floor, smiling. Another photo shows Christy looking out the window. And then, the last photo. The sun, slowly sinking over the water, the sky glowing orange and pink, the kind of beauty that makes you forget everything else. That picture would be the last image they ever took. At around 7:30 p.m., hotel staff see the three women eating dinner at the hotel restaurant. They're calm, happy, unaware of what's coming. Around 8:30 to 9 p.m., it's believed they met Chandler again, at the dock near the causeway. Just as he promised, witnesses later say they saw a small blue and white boat leaving the area around that time. By 3 a.m., they were dead. June 4, 1989. For 3 days, Joan, Michelle, and Christy Rogers have been missing. No one knows it yet, but on this morning, sailors crossing Tampa Bay make a horrifying discovery. Oh my God, that's a body. Within minutes, the Coast Guard receives 2 more calls. 3 bodies total, all female, all floating face down. The scene is horrifying. Each woman has her hands and feet tied, a thick rope around her neck, connected to a heavy concrete block. They were meant to sink, to disappear forever, but the concrete wasn't heavy enough. And now, they've surfaced. Officers cover the shoreline with yellow tape. News crews gather on the pier, and detectives stand in silence, staring at the bodies. One detail makes it even worse. The victims are naked from the waist down. The medical examiner confirms what investigators feared most. All 3 victims had water in their lungs. They were alive when they hit the water. Michelle, the 17-year-old, somehow managed to free one of her hands before she drowned. She fought, she tried, but it wasn't enough. For a full week, the 3 bodies remain nameless. The Florida heat has caused them to decompose quickly. Their features are gone, washed away by the bay. And hundreds of miles away, in Wilshire, Ohio, a father paces his living room floor, waiting, worrying, because his wife and daughters were supposed to be home days ago. Hal Rogers stands in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. No answer. Again. His wife Joan and their daughters Michelle and Christy were supposed to return from Florida nearly a week ago. At first, he thought maybe they took a detour. Car trouble, perhaps. But now, it's been too long. On June 8th, a housekeeper at the Days Inn in Tampa reports something strange. One of the rooms hasn't been touched in over a week. The beds are neatly made, luggage still in place, towels folded, the camera sitting on the nightstand. The hotel manager contacts police immediately. Detectives arrive and begin dusting for fingerprints. Within hours, they match the prints to the unidentified bodies pulled from Tampa Bay. Final confirmation comes through dental records. And with that, the nightmare becomes real. When the news reaches Hal Rogers in Ohio, his world falls apart. Friends say he collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The community in Wilshire is stunned. A small, close-knit town where everyone knows everyone, now mourning 3 of their own. Back in Florida, detectives work around the clock. Marine researchers at the University of South Florida help map out the water currents. They conclude the women were thrown into the bay from a boat. Not from a bridge, not from the shore. The killer had been out on the water with them. Soon after, investigators find the Rogers family car, a 1984 Oldsmobile Calais with Ohio plates, parked near the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Doors locked, nothing stolen, but on the dashboard, a folded map, with handwritten directions, in neat cursive. Those words would soon become the most important clue in the entire case. But first, investigators would spend 3 years chasing ghosts. For more than 3 years, the case remains unsolved. Detectives are flooded with leads. Hundreds of phone calls, thousands of tips, even false confessions. But nothing sticks. The killer is gone, vanished. Then, in 1992, a break comes from an unexpected place. A bulletin from Madeira Beach describes a recent assault on a 24-year-old Canadian tourist. The woman says she was taken on a boat ride by a man who tried to attack her. But she escaped. The description of the man, his voice, even his boat, all match details from the Rogers case. That man, Oba Chandler. Detectives dig deeper. The handwriting on the map from the Rogers car is compared to samples Chandler had written on a work order. The letters match perfectly, but police need confirmation, so they do something unusual. They put billboards all over Tampa Bay. Giant photos of the suspect's handwriting, asking the public, "Do you recognize this?" Days later, a call comes in from one of Chandler's former neighbors. "I know that handwriting. That's Oba's." From there, everything falls into place. Handwriting experts confirm the match. A palm print found on a brochure matches Chandler's too, and detectives discover something telling. Right after the billboards went up, Chandler sold his boat and quickly moved away with his family to Port Orange, near Daytona Beach. Running from the past he knew was catching up to him. September 24, 1992. Oba Chandler is arrested, charged with the murders of Joan, Michelle, and Christy Rogers. At first, police believe there might have been a second man involved. Maybe someone who helped lure or control the victims. This theory even appears in a 1991 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. But after Chandler's arrest, investigators realize he did everything alone. The theory falls apart when they learn Chandler had a habit of approaching women by himself. Using his smooth talk, his fake friendliness, to gain trust. Investigators also look into other possible suspects, including Joan Rogers, Hal's brother. John was already serving time in prison for rape, and had been accused of sexually assaulting Michelle before the murders. For a time, police wonder if he could have arranged their deaths from behind bars. But there's no evidence. Eventually, he's cleared. Even Hal Rogers himself becomes a temporary suspect. Police find out he withdrew $7,000 around the time his family disappeared. Suspicious, but Hal explains he took the money to fund his own search for them. Records later prove he never left Ohio. The deeper detectives look, the clearer it becomes. The friendly man from the causeway, the one who wrote those directions on the map and promised a sunset cruise, is the same man who tied their hands, threw them overboard, and watched them die. The hunt for truth is finally over. The monster has a name, Oba Chandler. But who was he? Before he became one of Florida's most hated killers, Oba Chandler was just another face in the crowd. Quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable. But behind that calm exterior was a life filled with pain, violence, and broken choices. Chandler was born October 11, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ohio. The fourth of 5 children in a poor, working-class family. His father, Oba Chandler Sr., and his mother, Margaret Johnson, struggled to provide. The home was small, tense, filled with shouting, poverty, and sadness. Then, when Oba was just 10 years old, tragedy struck. June 1957, his father hanged himself in the basement of their apartment, and Yam Oba found him. At the funeral, as dirt began to fall over the coffin, young Oba suddenly jumped into his father's grave, crying uncontrollably. That image stayed with everyone who saw it. A small boy, lost between grief and confusion. But instead of healing, Oba grew cold. By age 14, he'd already turned to crime. Stealing cars, breaking into homes around Cincinnati. Between ages 14 and 18, he was arrested more than 20 times. Prison became familiar, not as punishment, but as part of life. As an adult, Chandler didn't stop. Burglary, loitering, armed robbery, kidnapping, even possessing counterfeit money. His record read like a warning of what was coming. People who knew him said he could be charming, polite when he wanted to be, the kind of man who could make you trust him in minutes. But underneath, there was something off. Women described him as creepy, always watching, always too confident. In one disturbing case, he was caught masturbating while peeping through a woman's window. In another, far worse, Chandler and an accomplice broke into a couple's home at gunpoint. He made the man tie himself with speaker wire, then dragged the woman into the bedroom, forced her to strip to her underwear, and rubbed the cold barrel of his gun across her stomach. He didn't just rob his victims, he humiliated them. Despite all this, Chandler slipped through the cracks of the system. Short sentences, early releases, and right back to his old ways. By the late 1980s, he'd moved to Florida, working as an unlicensed aluminum siding contractor. To neighbors, he was a quiet family man. To others, a smooth-talking drifter who always seemed to have money but no real job. What most people didn't know was that between May and September 1991, while the triple murder case was still open, Chandler was actually working as an informant for the U.S. Customs Bureau in Tampa. The same man helping law enforcement was secretly the suspect they were hunting. After 3 years of investigation and one of Florida's most publicized manhunts, the man responsible for the murders of Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters finally stood trial. Clearwater, Florida. The courtroom is packed. Reporters, detectives, a community still haunted. Oba Chandler takes the stand in his own defense. Against the advice of his lawyers, he claims he's innocent. I met them. I gave them directions, but I never saw them again. He admits he was out on Tampa Bay the night of the murders. But he says he was fishing, alone. His story is riddled with inconsistencies. Chandler tells jurors his boat engine had failed due to a fuel line leak, that he called the Coast Guard for help, but investigators found no such record. Boat mechanics testify that Chandler's explanation makes no sense. The fuel lines on his boat ran upward. A leak would have sprayed gasoline into the air, dissolving any duct tape he claimed to have used. Then come the witnesses. A woman named Judy Blair testifies that just 2 weeks before the murders, Chandler invited her on a boat trip, raped her, and left her traumatized. Her account bears eerie similarities to the Rogers case. Same approach, same method, same waters. A former employee also takes the stand. Says Chandler once bragged about spending a night on the bay with 3 women. The same night Joan Rogers and her daughters vanished. Phone records prove Chandler made several ship-to-shore calls from his boat between 1 o'clock and 5 a.m., right around the time of the murders. Prosecutors argue these calls were part of his alibi, a desperate attempt to make it seem like he was somewhere else. But the most haunting testimony? It comes from Chandler's own daughter. Crystal takes the stand, tells the jury her father once admitted to killing 3 women, and said he was terrified to return to Tampa. By November 4, 1994, the evidence is overwhelming. The jury finds Oba Chandler guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Susan Schaefer calls him a man with no soul before sentencing him to death. The courtroom is silent, except for the sobs of family members who waited years for justice. Chandler shows no remorse, just a blank stare, as if the weight of what he'd done never touched him. After 17 years on death row, Oba Chandler's time is running out. October 10, 2011, Florida Governor Rick Scott signs his death warrant. The execution is scheduled for November 15, 2011, 4 p.m., Florida State Prison in Rayford. For Chandler, the countdown has begun. His lawyer says Chandler isn't fighting anymore. He's not putting pressure on me to find some magic way out. He just wants me to do what I reasonably can. By then, Chandler is in poor health. High blood pressure, heart disease, kidney problems, arthritis. Decades behind bars have taken a toll on his body, but not on his defiance. In the weeks leading up to his death, his lawyer tries one last time to halt the execution, arguing Florida's death penalty system is unconstitutional, but the motion is quickly denied. Every remaining appeal to the Florida Supreme Court, even the U.S. Supreme Court, is rejected. By November 15th, all legal doors are closed. That morning, Chandler is offered a last meal: 2 salami sandwiches on white bread with mustard, a peanut butter and grape jelly sandwich, iced tea, and coffee. Simple, almost childlike, the kind of meal you'd never expect from a man capable of unimaginable cruelty. There are no visitors that day. In fact, he hasn't received a single visitor during his entire 17 years on death row. At 4:08 p.m., guards escort Chandler from his cell. Each step deliberate, every door they pass is locked and sealed. Before entering the chamber, officials read the death warrant aloud, ask if he has any last spoken words. Chandler declines to speak, but he hands them a short written note. "You are killing an innocent man today." He's moved into the execution chamber, placed on the padded gurney. Medical staff attach IV lines to his arms. Guards fasten restraints across his chest, arms, and legs. The room is small, clinical. A thick glass wall separates the condemned from the witnesses. Selected witnesses, family members of the victims, prison officials, members of the press, sit on the other side. Watching, the warden reads final official statements, verifies the time. At exactly 4:25 p.m., the lethal drugs begin to flow through his veins. The flow of chemicals is deliberate, meant to cause unconsciousness, respiratory arrest, and then cardiac arrest. Within minutes, Chandler becomes still. A physician checks for vital signs. At 4:25 p.m., the official pronouncement is made: Oba Chandler is dead. The man who murdered 3 innocent women is gone. But his evil, it wasn't finished yet. For many, the story of Oba Chandler was supposed to end on November 15, 2011, the moment he was declared dead. But 3 years later, in February 2014, investigators uncovered a disturbing truth. Using new DNA technology, authorities confirmed that Chandler was responsible for another unsolved murder. That of 20-year-old Ivelis Berrios Begaris, a newlywed from Coral Springs, Florida. November 27, 1990. Ivelis was last seen leaving her job at the Sawgrass Mills Mall, where she worked at a sporting goods store. When she didn't return home, her husband drove to the mall, found her car, a 1985 Ford Tempo, sitting in the parking lot. All 4 tires slashed. Investigators believed Chandler had been stalking her for days. He slashed her tires, then approached, pretending to be a helpful stranger. "Need some help with that?" Ivlis likely accepted his offer, unaware she had just stepped into the hands of a predator. Just 3 hours after she was reported missing, 2 fishermen discovered her nude body under a neighborhood mailbox. Her wrists and ankles were bound, her hair matted with brown tape. The autopsy revealed she'd been raped and strangled. The case had gone cold for decades, until Chandler's DNA was matched to the evidence in 2014. Finally bringing closure to her family, police officially declared the case solved and began investigating other unsolved crimes in areas where Chandler had lived or worked. Fearing he may have claimed more unknown victims, how many women did Oba Chandler really kill? We may never know. The Oba Chandler story has been told in countless documentaries and books. It inspired a Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper series titled Angels and Demons by Thomas French. Episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, Forensic Files, Cold Case Files, and On the Case with Paula Zahn. Each retelling revisited the horror of the Rogers family murders and the hidden life of a man who looked ordinary but carried darkness beyond comprehension. Even in death, Oba Chandler's shadow continued to stretch, revealing that justice had ended one man, but not the echo of his crimes. Joan Rogers was 36 years old, a hard-working farmer's wife who rarely took a break. Michelle was 17, smart, beautiful, full of dreams. Christy was 14, just beginning to understand the world. They came to Florida for sunshine, for memories, for a vacation they'd cherish forever. Instead, they met a monster, a man who smiled, offered help, and then took them on a boat ride into the darkness. Their last moments were spent in terror, bound, helpless, thrown into the cold waters of Tampa Bay while still breathing. Michelle fought until her last breath, managing to free one hand, clawing at the ropes, desperate to save herself, to save her mother, to save her sister. But the water was too deep, the concrete too heavy, and Oba Chandler just watched. Their bodies surfaced 3 days later, but their story, it would take 3 years to tell. 3 years of investigation, 3 years of dead ends and false leads, until a handwritten map, neat cursive, looping smoothly, led investigators to the truth. That small piece of paper, sitting on the dashboard of their car, became the key to solving one of Florida's most chilling murder mysteries, and bringing a monster to justice. If this story haunted you, if it made you think twice about trusting a stranger, if it reminded you that evil can wear a friendly smile, then there's another case on your screen right now. One I believe was made for you. Because the truth is, Oba Chandler wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. There are predators out there right now, smiling, offering help, writing directions on pieces of paper. Joan, Michelle, and Christy trusted the wrong person, and it cost them everything. Remember their names, remember their faces, and never forget, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the nicest. Click the story on your screen now, because we can't look away. We won't forget. Joan, Michelle, Christy.